Greetings and welcome. You're tuned into TMH Daily English News. Eid Mubarak to everybody that's celebrating all across the world. As we move on to the headlines for today, Tigray government was disappointed over UN OSHA's incorporation of occupied territories in western Tigray and the Amhara regional state. Gunshots and tear gas disrupts Eid prayers in the capital city of Addis Ababa, and the Oromo Federalist Congress calls for an international neutral inquiry into the massacre of civilians in the Oromo region. Moving on to the main stories for today, the government of Tigray expressed their disappointment over UN OSHA's incorporation of occupied territories within the western Tigray zone and the Amhara regional states in its latest situation report. The government of Tigray in its Saturday statement said it's profoundly disturbed by the reckless decision of United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs to incorporate occupied territories within western Tigray, such as Walqait, Tsagade, and Satit Humera, into the Amhara regional state in its latest situation report issued on the 29th of this year. The statement noted that by appearing to legitimize the forcible seizure of the legitimate Tigrayan territories, OSHA has dangerously deviated from its basic mission of facilitating humanitarian operations around the world. The statement underlined by saying by intentionally or unintentionally putting its imprimatur in the illegal and illegitimate seizure of Tigrayan territories, OSHA has acted outside the bounds of its institutional mandate in the violation of the UN Charter, the General Assembly, and the UN Security Council resolutions. The statement added that OSHA's unfortunate claim, retracted since, would amount to the willful endorsement of the illegal annexation of the constitutionally recognized Tigrayan territory, and furthermore complicating efforts to bring the current conflict to an end through peaceful means. The government of Tigray called on the UN OSHA and other UN entities and organizations to constantly uphold their mandate, condemn the annexation of Western Tigray, along with the attendant violation of the international humanitarian law, as well as the international humanitarian law. It urged them to use the constitutionally recognized manner. Gunshots and tear gas disrupt Eid prayers in Addis Ababa as worshippers scramble in confusion and families get separated amongst the chaos. Today's Eid al-Iftar prayers at Addis Ababa Stadium in the Ethiopian capital were disrupted after gunshots and tear gas were discharged in the midst of the crowded places. Addis Standard journalists who were on the scene confirmed that the blasts were heard when prayers commenced, prompting the attendees to run in different directions. Several women were seen visibly distraught after being separated with their children. The event was being attended by hundreds and thousands of Muslims from all over the city. Mohammed, a witness who was at the stadium, said the police were telling the people that everything was fine and in return to their prayers, but the blasts continued to be heard. Nadir, another witness who spoke to ID Standard, said, "We heard 6 gunshots near Hyatt Regency Hotel. There are tear gas as well," he said. According to him, the shots were from security forces. Addis Standard spoke to an attendee of the prayer who was returning from the stadium. She said she saw people who were bleeding. Addis Standard said they saw several people, including children, returning from prayer, walking barefoot around the city and area of Magananya. A short statement by the city police simply described it as unrest instigated by a few individuals, and the police said some people were injured and that there were probably a lot of property damages as well. Mohammed, again another witness from the scene, however, insists that there were no riots on the scene. Addis Standard attempts to speak to the public relations head of Addis Ababa Police Commissioner and Commander Fasika Fente, which were to no avail. The atrocities and atrocious video footage of Ethiopian soldiers torturing and executing a Tigrayan teenager has been geolocated. The location of the brutal torture and execution has been geolocated at the outskirts of Balenta in the Amhara region, bordering the besieged region of Tigray. In this video, dozens of soldiers encircled a severely injured teenager. They kept on beating him continuously, taunting him, telling him to smile while destroying his face, and some are even seen comfortably recording all of this footage. No, they don't die that easy. Almost all of them, once we left for dead, eventually got back up. You can hear someone saying that in the video as well. The soldiers were encouraging a local girl, about 10 to 12 years old, who was included in the crowd, to stone the boy, which she eventually does. When a soldier reached into the boy's pocket and took out some money, she said, "Tear it up and drop it to the floor. That's a Tigrayan money. Don't want to have or anything to do with it." With disgust in her face, the soldiers laughed and repeated it after her. Finally, after all of the stoning, abusing, and mocking, the soldiers eventually shoot him to death. The Oromo Federalist Congress has called for an international, neutral, inquiry into the massacre of the civilians within the Oromia region. The Oromo Federalist Congress said in a statement Sunday that more than 278 civilians were massacred only in the last few days, between the 16th and the 29th of April, in a joint operation by the government and the extremist Fano group of Oromia. In Oromia, a campaign led by the principle of drying the sea to catch fish, a hidden agenda from the world view, is being carried out in the various parts of the region and of the country, as OFC said. In a statement that killing civilians, burning homes, looting and destroying properties, imprisoning and torturing, sometimes killing parents on alleged affiliation of their children with OLA has been a commonplace. The party accused that more recently, drone and helicopter strikes have been carried out by the government forces, and a connection with this campaign, adding that mounting evidence from the victims suggests that it's leading to the loss of many civilians, their lives, the destruction of homes and properties as well, and the displacement of even the survivors. In addition to the government forces, OFC also accused the extremist Fano group in Oromia of killing civilians, and the statement underlined that this group is becoming a threat to peace in the region and to the neighboring states as well. The party said, however, as the regional government is reluctant to take action, we call on the federal government to provide immediate and legal solutions. Amongst its 7-point resolution is a repeat of the party's earlier call for the federal government to end the ongoing conflict with armed groups and to resolve the issue peacefully, and for the government to immediately call a ceasefire and enter into negotiations. The party also called for an international neutral inquiry into the massacre of civilians in various parts of Oromia. U.S. Congressman Brad Sherman declines invitation to co-host Ethiopian Finance Minister. Congressman Sherman was invited to co-host a reception at the Republican Club for Ethiopian Finance Minister, and Ahmed Shide, a Ethiopian ambassador to the United States, Fitz Umaraga. The invitation was sent by former Congressman Jack Kingston, whose lobbying firm represents the government of Ethiopia currently. Sherman goes to say, quote unquote, "I declined, and I will not break bread with a minister of a government that has used a food blockade to kill thousands of its civilians." On his official Twitter account, as you can see on your screen, an invitation he decided to turn down. Member of Tigray Armed Forces Central Command, Getachew Reda, also applauded Congressman Sherman's decision, saying, "Now this is what it means to be principled," and he also wrote that on his official Twitter account as well. Sherman has been a vocal critic of the Ethiopian government for its practices of blocking humanitarian aid into the region of Tigray, which, according to the World Food Program, has resulted in 40% of Tigray's population suffering from an extreme lack of food, and even 90% of its population currently needing urgent humanitarian assistance as well. While the Ethiopian government's imposed media blackout has been made tracking the full scale of devastation inside Tigray nearly impossible, recent reports estimate that about 500,000 Tigrayans have died and nearly 10% of Tigray's population. Our final update for today, Abiy Ahmed's botched centralization is said to be fueling Ethiopia's feuding centrifugal forces. Rent Lefort, alluding to what he called credible diplomatic sources indicating discussions between Tigrayan and the federal military commanders. And then, despite denials by both sides, Abiy Ahmed and Debretsion ገብረሚካኤል, but only Addis Ababa and Mekelle, were reported negotiation without involving or even consulting other Ethiopian parties, let alone Asmara. According to those sources, these parties are set out the terms of a 30-day cessation of hostilities and the specifics of lifting the blockade, the continuation of negotiations to achieve a permanent ceasefire, as well as beyond that, an attempt to address Ethiopia's fundamental political problems as well. It was agreed that it would have been made public simultaneously in Addis Ababa and Mekelle, thus committing both to its terms. Suddenly, however, the Ethiopian government unilaterally announced on the 24th of March the indefinite humanitarian truce with the purpose to ensure the free flow of emergency humanitarian aid to all of those in need of assistance. Ren Lefort noted, however, once again, Abiy Ahmed has reneged on his commitments. Lefort added that Abiy, by declaring a truce, notably without specifying its geographical scope, the participabilities and the implementations, and any plans to advance the negotiations, distanced himself from the agreement with the Mekelle, released himself from obligation of a cessation of hostilities. Despite Abiy's pipe dreams, Lefort says the economy is currently collapsing, adding that the annual food inflation is about at 40%, creating a risk of a lot of hunger riots. Signs of mistrust between Abiy Ahmed and the Amhara elite, a key pillar of his coalition, are multiplying daily, and so are the gaps with the Asmara as well. Lefort also mentioned that armed opposition in the Oromo region as another driving factor to this cause. According to Ezekiel Gabisa, an Oromo academic activist, the main danger for Ethiopia is no longer balkanization, but what he calls Rwandanization. Last but not least, Ethiopia has de facto lost large parts of its sovereignty with the weakening of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. The Eritrean army occupied parts of Tigray as well. Asmara is said to have gained a strong position in this Ethiopian security services. Meanwhile, it's bypassing Addis Ababa, the capital, to forge increasingly close political and military links with parts of the Amhara elite. Eritrea's Isaias Afwerki is working hard so that he can play the puppet master, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And according to Lefort, this violent scattering is too far-reached to expect what remains of the central power could find the strength to put the country back together. He said, however, now it appears that Ethiopia can only reach some order in a very loose ethnic federation, and added that the fighting this reality would only intensify the centrifugal dynamics to the point of, again, balkanization. That concludes our news for today. Hope everybody has an amazing Eid. Bye-bye.